We just heard Madrigal, the middle section of an oratorio called Letters from Emily by Grant Edwards, who is with me today. Thanks for being here, Grant. Grant is the director of music at First Congregational Church, located on the Park Blocks here in downtown Portland, Oregon. And he's been at First Congregational for 26 years. He has a BA in organ from Lewis and Clark College, and he studied at the Ludwig Maximilians Universität in Munich and is a Deutsch UNESCO scholar in Weimar, East Germany. He's been an active member of the Portland AGO chapter, and he's been our sub-dean and dean of the chapter. He has performed for conventions of the Oregon Historical Society, and in 2003 recorded an eclectic album, Musical Feast, at St. Stephen's Episcopal in Seattle. And Grant is also the tonal director at the Bond Oregon Builders Company here in Portland since 1993, and in collaboration with Bond, he constructed the organ at First Congregational, and it incorporates portions of the original instrument from 1951, as well as a historical case that dates back to 1877. And we're here to talk about a concert that Grant will be performing at First Congregational on November 14th at 7 p.m., along with the First Congregational Choir and some other performers that I'll let Grant introduce in just a second. This is being presented as a program in conjunction with the Portland AGO chapter, and we really appreciate you making this music available to the community. Featured in the concert will be one of your own compositions, of which I mentioned, Letters of Emily, which is an oratorio featuring the poetry of Emily Dickinson, as well as an arrangement for piano and organ by Saint-Saëns, Carnival of the Animals. Thanks for being with me, Grant. Can you tell us a little bit about the concert? What can the audience expect?
Well, thank you. And thank you for visiting me last night. What can the audience expect? Let's see. I'm trying to kind of provide a cross-section of my compositions, but at the same time, I've tried to choose compositions that will be interesting to the American Guild of Organists crowd. So pieces you might be able to sing in your own church. It's not all exclusively with organ accompaniment. We all have to provide piano accompaniment, and there's some a cappella works as well. So I think that'll be useful to people who are attending. Let's see. It's mostly sacred music, of course, because of the focus of the Guild is made up of church musicians. But at the same time, I think secular music is wonderful as church music as well. So I'm going to be presenting some arrangements of some secular music that I've done. Yeah, as for Carnival of the Animals, that was an early transcription of mine, and it's just fun. Even if you don't like anything I wrote, you're gonna like that. So I think that'll be a draw. We're going to use the Ogden Nash narrations, and yeah, I've also included in the program 3 pieces for the coming Advent season, because that's starting this at the end of this month, and I thought people might be interested in that. It also includes one of the few solo organ works that I have composed. I don't generally write for solo organ. I love so many composers for organ, and there's so many great pieces out there. I haven't felt called to do that, especially. That's basically the reason. I'm mostly a vocal music composer, but I will also play one of my psalm rhapsodies for solo piano. I'm not very aware of sacred music for piano, just because I play the organ most of the time. So I thought that might be interesting for people to hear a piece of sacred music for piano. It's a rhapsody on Psalm. Oh gosh, how embarrassing. Psalm 42, I believe. Yeah, Psalm 42, like as the deer longs for the water brooks. Yes, any
Sounds like a great lineup.
To add to that?
Tell us about the other performers who will be joining you.
Yes, really, I'm really blessed and very very fortunate to have such a fine group of singers. We'll have a 16 voice choir for the concert, but they sound often twice as large. It's really extraordinary. My four section leaders are just superb singers. It'd be Cheryl Wood, soprano, Elizabeth Winship, alto, Avesta Mirashrafi is tenor, and Greg McMahon is our bass. Although as a soloist, he's a Helden tenor and also plays the flute. So you're going to hear his flute playing as well.
Oh, that'll be marvelous. So I mentioned that in the intro, we heard a part of letters from Emily. It was the middle part. What can you tell us about the piece?
About that piece Madrigal that you heard the clip that you played
Yeah,
specifically.
specifically about Madrigal, and then generally about the whole oratorio.
Mhm. So Madrigal was an early composition of mine. I wrote it in the year 2000. Now I didn't start composing in 2000. I actually composed 3 albums worth of rock, pop, alt rock music before I was a classical composer. So that was my background, and then I switched to a classical when I got frustrated with technology in music. In the 1980s, synthesizers were very popular, and that got to seem fussy to me, and I didn't like the idea that in the future you couldn't reproduce my music because I programmed my own synthesizer sounds. Um, I I realized that classical instruments were always the same and probably will always be the same, at least generally for the future. And that if I composed for that in that genre, my music would have a greater chance of surviving. And I'm also a huge fan of classical music. J.S. Bach and Britten are my favorite composers. So, you know, I I changed. I wrote Madrigal because I wanted to write a perfect little gem of a 4-part a cappella choral piece. It might, even though I was probably not capable at the time, that was my dream. And so I set that text, which is um, I'm drawing a blank here. If I can stop one heart from breaking, I shall not live in vain, etc., etc. And actually, it was the ending of the piece that came into my head first. Um, I wrote that as a perfect little choral a cappella piece. And then I decided that I wanted to write an opera of sorts. It could be staged. Letters from Emily. Uh, and it's quasi autobiographical. I spent 2 years reading all of her poems and selecting the ones that I thought described things that happened in my life. And then I put them in a certain order, which tells a story. In the story, the composer meets Emily in the end in a tomb, actually, and they talk until the moss reaches their lips and covers up their names. But that's not the ending. I end with the text. I tell you how the sun rose. But I digress. Madrigal. I composed it as a madrigal type, a 4-part piece, a cappella, and it's got that lilt to it. But I also called it madrigal because it's the mother of the entire oratorio. It's the crux of it. It happens right in the middle, and it may be its most poignant section. This is interesting. When I sat down to start orchestrating the oratorio, I got through all of part 1, which is 25 minutes long. And then I got into part 2, where madrigal is. It's the third movement of part 2. There's a faith, hope, and love are the beginning of that part 2. And madrigal is the love section, charity section. Well, I got to that and I'm like, boy, I've learned a lot. I've gotten a lot better since I composed this piece originally. I didn't like it. I thought it didn't sound as good as the rest of it. I thought it was, yeah, it was a little too dissonant. It just wasn't my musical language anymore, and I didn't like it. So I wondered what to do. And so I woke up on Christmas Day, 2008. It was December 25th, and sat down at the computer and like, I'm going to write a new setting of this text. And I did. In that one day, I simply recomposed it from the very beginning. It doesn't have any, it barely has anything to do with the original composition, which is now, I don't know. I don't want anybody to hear that. So you're not. Anyway, it's funny what happened with Madrigal. I had another poem I wanted to set in this, but didn't know where, which was I reason earth is short, and anguish absolute, and many hurt. But what of that? And it's an unusual poem by Emily. It's not in any meter. It's free verse. It's got these questions. What of that? What of that? What of that? It's really examining what heaven really means. And another member of the choir, Nan Wagner, she approached me wanting to sing an Emily Dickinson song one Sunday. And if I had any, she might be able to sing. And I said, well, I can arrange one for you pretty quick. And I realized that the madrigal, the choral piece, was not a piece in itself. It needed a recitative to balance it out. And that other poem fit together like a puzzle. In fact, people don't know it's a different poem when they read the libretto of Letters from Emily, but it's two poems that are put together. And that's what you're going to hear on Monday. Cheryl Wood will sing the solo at the beginning. It's a recitative and aria, and then the chorus echoes. I had the aria that Cheryl sings echoed in the choir to sort of represent this message going out into the world and other people repeating it and spreading the word. Kind of Emily evangelism, I guess, in a way. So that's the story of that piece. I do think it is pretty close to a perfect little choral composition, although there is a chord that happens, you'll hear it. It's a very interesting chord. And the only way it could happen was if there is a fifth voice. So the soloist sings the fifth note of that chord near the end of Madrigal.
Well,
I
it's
can go on and on, as you can tell.
it's apparent that it is apparent that Emily Dickinson is meaningful to you. In fact, I think at the rehearsal last night, when I visited, I think I heard you mention that you have a picture of yourself at Emily Dickinson's gravesite, and I was just wondering, if you could share a little bit about what her poetry means to you.
Oh, yes, and I'd like to share about that picture too. And thank you for asking. I honestly believe that the words of Emily Dickinson are prophetic. I honestly believe she's as much of an evangelist as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And in fact, the piece of art that I had commissioned for the program and the poster of Letters from Emily, the premiere, I wanted to depict her sitting at a desk writing with a dove behind her, casting light through her brain and coming out on the paper, like you often see evangelists depicted. And I, maybe this is provocative, I don't know, but I honestly believe that her words are that prophetic. She feared, this is funny. I read somewhere, and I can't find where, but I know that I read this, that Emily Dickinson read the passage in Matthew about how, the parable of the talents, if you don't use them, they will be taken away. For those who have much, much shall be given, and those who have little, that shall be taken from them. It has nothing to do with money. It's spiritual gifts, and Emily knew that. Emily was a Congregationalist. She was a member of the same denomination I am, and I've been to her house as a Congregational Church across the street. So Emily took this seriously. I remember reading that it was devastated her because she read the Matthew effect, and she knew it was true. And I think she believed that if she didn't have the capacity to write everything down at the moment, right when it occurred to her, that she would lose the spiritual gift. So she would write things on scraps of envelopes that she kept in her pocket at any time. And I think it was part of her reclusiveness. She had to do this because she was worried God would take away this gift that she had if she didn't do it all the time. So I really feel for her for that. And I think she's a prophet. I really do.
Well, it doesn't get much more prophetic than because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me, right?
Yeah,
um,
that's true.
do you feel some kinship to Dickinson because of your common membership in the Congregational Church, or is that just coincidental? Or
It is coincidental, but I sure do feel it actually. Um, and in my daydreaming, I sometimes wonder, boy, all I want out of life is to be the music director at some little tiny church in New England or something, like where nobody would know even who I am. I, I don't know. The thought of being famous is toxic to me, and this, I'm really uncomfortable with self-promotion, which is a bad thing for a musician. But clearly, Emily was like that a little bit too. So I do feel a kinship with her in many ways, and yeah, I like the church connection a lot. I'm glad that that's a coincidence.
yeah, that's neat. Um, Anything else about letters from Emily that you'd like to share?
Gosh, yeah, probably. Um, and now I'm scrambling my
Tell us
brain.
about the premiere. This isn't the
Oh,
first time it's been performed. How did it come about that you were able to get it organized for a full performance? When was that?
I'm glad you asked that. And again, we're not
Okay.
going to perform the whole oratorio. It required 14 instrumentalists, and I had a choir of 32 for the premiere. And I'm glad you asked about that. That was in on June 30th, and no, May 30th and June 1st, 2019. We all know what happened soon after that. A lot of choral organizations next seasons never happened, and mine didn't either because of the pandemic. And we shouldn't have been able to do that. It was a miracle, the Letters from Emily performance. I gathered together a ragtag choir. You didn't even have to have choral experience to be in my choir. I believe in that. I believe that anybody can sing and anybody can be taught. And so I gathered together this wonderful group of some people who had never sung in a choir before, and some had sung in choirs all their lives and were professional. And it all came together. We had no reason that this should have worked. It's an enormous effort to learn this piece. It's choral heavy, and there were a lot of solos, but there's a lot of choral music in it. But boy, if we hadn't done that, that was our last chance. The pandemic hit. None of us knew. And I felt driven to do this right then, even though we had no business performing such a major piece. It was certainly the most complicated conducting that I've ever done in my life, and probably my best conducting, I'm happy to say. It was just to hear this. I remember at the dress rehearsal when we got to the end of part one, and they sang "Much Madness is Divinest Sense," which was a trio sonata that actually I wrote, and then I wrote the trio sonata first, and then put it together as a choir and orchestral piece. And when that finished, I remember saying to the group, "This was the best thing I ever heard." And I meant it. It was the best thing I ever heard. And to hear that performed with such extraordinary quality was just a high point of my life.
Well, I'm so glad that the community will have an opportunity to hear parts of it again on November 14th at First Congregational at 7 p.m. To take us out, we're going to hear the choir in rehearsal again, singing another part of your composition, Letters from Emily. And that's a setting of the poem, Hope is a Thing with Feathers. And I was hoping I could ask you to recite that poem for us.
Yes, hope. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, but never in extremity it asked a crumb of me.
Thank you so much, Grant. There's so many other things that I would like to ask you, but I think we need to draw it to a close here. And once again, the concert, which I believe we're calling I Love All Beauteous Things,
Yes.
performing compositions by Grant Edwards and others, and featuring the choir of First Congregational Church, located at 1126 Southwest Park Avenue in Portland, Oregon. And the concert will be Monday, November 14th at 7 p.m. We hope that you can all join us. It's going to be a wonderful event.
Oh,